One of the age-old questions is how much money do you need to have before you can start an SMSF? There's been a bit of debate about it recently, but Grant Abbott from LY Legal is here with me to quickly discuss this topic. How you going, Grant?
Yeah, really good. Thanks, Darren. We've just come through this productivity summit. Everyone, and I'm certainly seeing a huge increase in the younger brigade now, picking up on SMSFs.
Yeah, so originally there was always a sort of a benchmark set by the regulator of a suggested $500,000 worth of assets before you can start an SMSF. And then a couple of years ago, they actually scrapped that guideline. And some of the research says $200,000 is competitive from both a return and a cost perspective. In your opinion, like what should people look towards?
I think it actually turns into a timing issue. So, for example, there might be a couple who've got maybe $500,000 and they're age 65. So it's probably not worthwhile setting up a self-managed super fund because it's going to be on the decline. Whereas I see a lot of people coming in with maybe 150, 100, 200, taking their money out in super and then leveraging and acquiring property. So, for example, if I've got 150, and before you go in, Latrobe or Liberty or one of the players, in fact, I think ANZ's even coming back in the market now, will lend me, $500,000 on that. Suddenly, my self-managed super fund or my super goes from $150,000 investment in a retail or industry fund to suddenly, $650,000. So suddenly we're well and truly beyond that benchmark, and the contributions, our SGC plus the ring, generally is going to cover the borrowing costs anyway. So, and then the other big thing that I see is a lot of people going in and we want to get into crypto. Now, I'm not you know, I can't give any advice on crypto because personally it's not a big thing. I've never held crypto. But I remember my SMSFD way back in 2009, I had digital assets and cryptocurrencies in there. That's when Bitcoin was first taking off. So that the amount is going to be age specific. And I think the other one that we have to understand is that people are quite myopic and that they'll say, okay, well, I'm in an industry fund, I've got 75 or $100,000, but they fail to forget that a self-managed super fund is actually a family superannuation fund. So that when you set these things up, that they're beyond your life because they go into perpetuity. So they should be looked as an environment. Now, when I set up, I'm going to be in this for the rest of my life. Plus, my children are potentially going to be in there as well because you can now have a six-member fund. So that if you're in a relationship and both of you are working and you're age 32 and you've got $100,000 or $120,000, absolutely go in for it. But the big one is where they got that $200,000 amount was essentially looking at the costs. So if it looks, about $3,000 a year for audits and particularly accounting costs, if you look at that, that's like if you've got 200,000, that's 1.5%, which is probably pretty commensurate with what the retail and industry funds do. But I'd go back and say age specific. If you're going to borrow, you don't need it. You can have a little more limited balance, but it should be pooled. So see what your spouse has, see what you have, and then essentially go in together. So, that's basically where I would stand.
Yeah, Grant, you mentioned costs, and of course, it's always been a bit of an extrapolation of cost when you talk about a minimum benchmark, if you want, or rule of thumb. We're seeing admin costs actually fall for SMSS with the advent of technology and more efficient systems. So, do you reckon that that will actually make it a lower mark for new entrants into the sector as we progress into the future?
Oh, absolutely. So technology, I've developed quite a few AI tools. In fact, I'm developing one around, as you've seen, the self-managed super fund and also family wealth protection. We're doing one at the moment. We're just writing a back end for tax gurus. So that's going to actually drop advising costs. It's going to have quite a deleterious impact on things. And then technology is that really when it comes down to self-managed super fund, just entries from data, and those costs will come down. Virtually, yeah, you could almost go to a stage in the future which is a little bit scary, but the tax office, particularly if you're just in equities and that, they've got all the data anyway, so they'd be able to prepare they've got the SGC, they've got the data, they'd be able to almost prepare a pro forma SMSF return for you. I don't think I necessarily want to see that, but you're quite right, technology is going to drop it down. The other one is that if I can flip it around, is that the industry retail funds say, look, their administration costs are actually going up and they're increasing. And they'll say, look, $78 a month or, whatever it is, but they fail to take into account that behind that, there's generally, three, four, five, six different levels of fees that are being hidden behind, including fees being paid to industry fund services for the funds management. So you mightn't have much to do with the administration, but when it goes and invests, there might be a 1 or 1.5%, or if they're in a hedge fund, it might even be success fees in there as well. So that those fees are completely different because if I want to go into equities, I'll be able to go into E-Trade or ComSec or whatever, and virtually there's virtually no cost to trade on that. Plus, I get all the trading tools. If I go into a property, obviously there's interest costs, rates and all of that sort of stuff, potentially land tax as well. So I know what my costs are there compared to all these hidden costs there. And I always talk to people when I'm doing seminars. I say, look, when you're in a industry or retail fund, you've chosen because it's your salary that's going in your SGC. It's actually your salary. You you're almost like a GST. You're just giving it to them, and then you got the faceless men. I mean, you're in the industry, Darin. So you tell me. How many SMSF fund managers have you ever met?
None.
Exactly. Exactly.
No,
Exactly.
I say none from the perspective of being specifically dedicated to the SMSF space.
But surely
Yes,
that should be and the same thing with super is that you don't know whether it's a 25-year-old, you don't know whether it's an algorithm doing all your investments. And to be honest, a lot of them don't outperform the benchmark. So I mean, even if you pulled your money out, technology costs come down in SMSF, you get a Vanguard or someone, one of their ETFs, you're paying 3 or 4 basis points on it. You're mirroring the index. You're going to be in front anyway, long term, if that makes sense. And I always look at the big one, and this is probably one that's a really good story for everyone to look at it is the traditional methodology of Australia's gaining wealth for retirement income to get cash flow. So that's the, Kiyosaki method is to go and buy property and negative gearing. So what we do is we save money from our after tax. We go and, buy a property with, 5, 10, 15, 20% deposit. We then go and we have rental. Australia's rental income yields around about 2 to 3%. So it means that there's a tax loss there. My costs of investment, obviously are greater than my return. So what happens? That gives me a tax loss, which I can then offset against PAYG. So everyone's like, happy days, I'm going to build a property portfolio. The problem is when you get around to age 65, and so this is now replacing your salary. So I've retired. Hey, fantastic. No mortgages to pay. I've got 3 or 4 investment properties or 2 or 3. Suddenly I'm getting all this rental income, which is great because that's accrued over time. But then the issue is that from that perspective is that I'm going to continue to pay tax on that for the rest of my life. But if I've held that property for 20 or 30 years, it's got an accrued capital gain on it. And that's going to be spilled somewhere. Or more importantly, as we've discussed before, is that I think Australia is well on the way to wealth tax generally, which means that accrued capital gain will actually be taxed on an annual basis. So it's sort of, up against a pretty hard place. Whereas if I'd taken those same investments, and this is where Gen X, which is your generation, and the millennials are starting to see they want to do their own thing. If they did exactly the same portfolio or build up a portfolio inside self-managed super fund, the first thing is their deposit is actually coming from SGC. So it's preferred tax money that's building up their deposit rather than after tax money outside. So you're going to get a deposit a lot quicker inside a self-managed super fund. And again, many people watching this when we came around to the original discussion was how much do you need? A lot of people already got enough money to start getting on the property ladder. The benefit of it though is when that SGC comes in, the 12%, if I put that into an industry or retail fund, within a week, 15% is sliced off the top straight away on contributions tax. It doesn't happen inside your own self-managed super fund. If you put in $20,000 into your super as a deductible contribution, so that's pre-tax, and I'm going through the negative gearing the same way as I was doing outside, then effectively I've got contributions going in, which is salary, my salary, so same as negative gearing, and that tax loss is actually going to reduce my contributions tax. So I'm well and truly, in front of the game right from the start. And that means I can then invest, I'm gonna get more property inside a self-managed super fund. So it means I can go down the track and keep on putting more contributions because I've got a guaranteed stream of salary that's going to come in and start building my portfolio. Whereas I can't do it outside because I've got HECS debt, I've got this, I've got the families, inflation, all that. This one that's guaranteed coming in. Let's say AI takes my job anyway. But the big thing is that when I turn 65, remember outside, tax forever, accrued capital gain, inside the fund, once I retire, and we start a pension, you still keep the same property portfolio, but I'm not paying any tax on that rental income. And if I decide to sell the property, which a lot of people don't do outside because they're scared of capital gains tax, I don't have to worry about capital gains tax. So it's like chalk and cheese. Negative gearing in a self-managed super fund is 10 times better than negative gearing outside. And if you think of all the wealth that the baby boom generation created outside through negative gearing, they're now stuffed now because they're paying, particularly if you're in Melbourne, they're paying land tax plus surcharges, plus. They're paying income tax, and then they've got this accrued capital gain. If they'd done it inside a self-managed super fund, which the smart people have done, they're in a really good position. I met one guy who's, just to give you an idea, he's 40, 45, and he's got $28 million of property inside his self-managed super fund. Now, obviously, he's got to worry about Div 296, but it's something, and the philosophy is it's your money, do something with it, don't give it to the faceless men. Get on the ladder and remember this is for a long term. The more wealth you have when you're 65, and I tell everyone, you need to get at least $2 million, you and your spouse, at age 65 to have a really good retirement in today's dollars. So the earlier you do it, the better.
All right, Grant. Thanks for the discussion.
Thank you.